Hello everyone, today we talked about a topic that somehow drove the web, or at least YouTube, crazy among the community of, again, pseudo-intellectual, philosophical, whatever, and niche, and that revolves around a by now notorious statement by Jordan Peterson, about whom I made a video a couple of years ago. I've never really entered the discourse revolving around these figures in particular, because it turns out that, again, debates between Peterson, Dawkins, as we will see today, I will follow the script of a very brief video by Alex O'Connor that also discussed with Peterson a bit like the same topics, and that somehow seems to have really have bogged down most of the general debate around anything to itself, right? Meaning it's pretty alarming, in my opinion, that any debate, mostly from my side, it's a conservative concern, but this is literally as seemingly as far as today's world goes in terms of sort of broader philosophical, scientific, cultural reflections. And I'll be honest, I am going to try to contact certain figures, possibly Peterson himself. I doubt that, given the scarce notoriety of my channel, I will go anywhere, but I'm confident after years of dealing with tradition on the channel that, as we will see now, there can be pretty straightforward answers to issues that, first of all, Peterson does not seem to be aware of. We'll talk about this in a while. I will by now suspend any judgment on him, because I know that some of my followers like him, others dislike him. I've had some interesting debate with Veritas and Caritas that, as you know, has essentially a left, at least left perspective on the subjects, and that, however, more than else, the world at large does not seem absolutely aware of to begin with. I mean, Peterson has followed throughout his career a path that would obviously in some ways be conducive to a broader traditional awareness that, however, he does not seem to be able to realize, to properly define, and to even conceive as a distinct and much wider notion that most of his specific personal educational baggage allows him to get. In other words, this guy basically has gotten a glimpse of tradition, but does seem, and I'll explain also later why I think that there may be some issue with this. There may be some sort of say surfacial, or at least publicly presented position on religion and other topics, especially, well, okay, I will not say this now, that are willingly sort of containing the debate to mostly a Christian standpoint, without, in fact, understanding the proper Catholic meaning of Christianity, which is also the traditional one, right? And from one side, I really believe that there is some of this, that is to say, in front, especially of the Anglo-American conservative audience, starting to take other avenues and taking in sort of a broader the scale and dimension and depth of discourse is not profitable for today's sort of main conservative thinkers, because what they do within certain specifically conventional, again, Anglo-American conservative confines seems to be satisfactory for them. On the other hand, I truly believe that most of them completely ignore tradition from a historical, you can add a European to some extent, but literally Catholic standpoint. I don't think that this video is going to make a lot of views, but if Jordan Peterson's memes at this point is, what do you mean to believe? Schwerpunkt meme is, do you know what Catholic means? No, you don't. All right, 95% of people who hear the term Catholic do not, even if we're talking even Christian people, do not factually understand what Catholic means under any theological, historical, cultural point of view. So I'm also leaving that maybe out of this video because I made so many videos about the imperial Catholic tradition that at this point we can't simply separate the two. I would really like to show how this entire debate, where people literally lost themselves as in a soap bubble, is a complete non-problem. Meaning the entire issue now in criticism about Peterson, it's going to be in this sense a defense of Peterson, but also showing how himself could simply and better articulate his thoughts and respond in a truly traditional way to what, of course, on YouTube most of the time is just liberals smearing him with, I don't know, third grader logic or whatever, and thinking that that's, an intellectual position. Here, of course, we are a bit on a different level. But again, from Peterson himself, I would expect more, also considering that by now he has had the time to move away from, again, Jung, Piaget, etc., those sources that at least when he was still in between with mostly a psychologistic approach, a psychoanalytical approach to conservatism, where he is apparently main source of references. Dostoevsky, Solzhenitsyn, he has, it's not like these are sort of negative cultural standpoints of reference, also whether you agree with them or not, right? Dostoevsky is not a hero, but in a sense, he depicts a hero that does not succeed anymore. He's the reflection of the end of tradition that somehow kicks in as among even modern conservatives as a normal situation where people really think alongside the cliches of the so-called scientific revolution without even understanding what the traditional premise of that was, and missing in that sense also what Dostoevsky's work was actually about. And that's actually the point. This is also a broader criticism to, I hate the term mainstream, but this is also what most of them would define themselves like conservatism lacks of. It's a basically post-traditional form of, in fact, conservatism that, however, lacks most of any traditional form and substance, and that has basically normalized itself by dispatching it from some higher form of sort of cultural or moral standpoint, by essentially indulging in what, I don't know, by even the standards of 2 generations ago, you would have been just a leftist by your grandparents' standards, given the appalling moral and personal cultural disgrace, collapse, and annihilation that the average person, including the average conservative, shows today. Let's not even talk about leftists, but let's in fact debunk some of their intentions. And I will actually, I think for the thumbnail I use somebody else's videos, which was the one that was mocking Peterson to get more clicks. It's not clickbait, actually. It's illustrative of how people began, because this is, I don't know if I've followed the topic, but basically everybody started claiming in a broader picture that Peterson is broke intellectually, that he has become a meme of himself, that he doesn't quite reason anymore, that he has taken on this asceticistic tangent, that he's a Christian but doesn't want to say that he's a Christian. As a matter of fact, from a Catholic standpoint, and again, you don't know most of the times what Catholic actually means, and this is also a way I use to troll people, which it's as righteous as actually substantial if you eventually get to know the meaning of what I'm discussing. He actually makes a fair point, right? Peterson is somehow an emotional person to a degree, so he tends to respond at a time, especially against some sort of mildly confrontational figure, in ways that tend mostly to shock, let's say, not necessarily to shock him, but let's say to, of course, highlight the issue with that kind of thinking, which is actually a correct way of doing so, but very often without explaining the matter in a more articulated, more sort of coherent, and in fact doctrinal, theoretical fashion, right? On my channel, I made lots of videos, and perhaps the most important one, the truly foundational one, is the one about the doctrine of the 2 natures, that I think Peterson, to a degree, ignores, because again, he got to some point where he also got in the past when studying tradition, or at least before that, because this doctrine is really foundational. And I still conflated two different dimensions that seemingly Peterson does not manage to reconcile. Peterson has this attitude of saying, in front of bigger questions like, I don't know, what do you think heaven is? What do you think the afterlife is? I don't know. Well, traditionally, and that's also why I would like to contact the guy, we know pretty well what that means. And no, you will not find it on YouTube unless you watch me, in a sense. You will not find it in any kind of discourse that is currently taking place online. And it's instead something very serious, but also very defined. And that gives pretty straightforward answer, not much circumvolution. Except, again, you must be able to reason on different levels of the question, which is a doctrine of the two natures actually entails. And naturally, also tradition at large is somehow complex. It has different parts that you must study on the basis of tradition. As I often say, because most of the debate, as we just outlined, revolves around the concept of belief, right? On Schwerpunkt, I always pose myself as, first of all, like a faceless, I'm a voice here, right? And I'm just expounding tradition as far as tradition itself was revealed, was handed down through the generations, not just its inner coherence, but the actual alignment to what most of what we know from a moral and scientific standpoint, and in the other part sort of being, in a sense, like the what we need to bridge the gap between what we know we don't know. Sometimes we call it metaphysics, which already for some people is already, this guy is talking nonsense, whatever. And I'm still, even though I made tens of videos on the topic, we're still at the beginning of it all under so many points of view. So I will read and comment the script of Alex O'Connor. I don't know whether this is his official channel or it's just curated by people who are, following him, whatever. This is a video from June the 10th, and it got over 200,000 views. It's titled, "What Do You Mean by Believe?" which is exactly the meme we were talking about. So this is essentially a video commentary. I mean, the one by O'Connor. I will not discuss the guy. I mean, he is smart, right? He's young. He's a critical thinker. He has, I don't know, like all the titles in the world and all that kind of stuff. But he, unsurprisingly, became more famous as a sort of YouTube person than anything engaging in those topics. And he's a bit voice of, I would say, of moderation. He himself stated that he started from more radical positions. As far as I understand, he's an atheist. And so he's mostly challenging Peterson, but he also took on this role of, okay, let's try to understand what at this point these characters actually mean, like in this case, because it may not be so obvious what they're talking about. I think that O'Connor is himself not acquainted, even though he, again, travels, on the wavelength of a big deal of philosophical, scientific discourse. I don't think he is of the typical Anglo-Saxon, empiricistic, rationalistic mold, right? So to him, like, the entire concept of tradition is, I think, largely unknown as a properly body of doctrine. And he, I think, tends to analyze everything just from the standpoint of the human, as most people are fundamentally doing when, from a liberal perspective, when criticizing Peterson. And I will exemplify what he says, not much because I want to criticize like any involved. Actually, this I would like to thank them for all what they do, like this Jubilee presence, debate for Peterson, O'Connor's commentaries, etc. But I will try to explain most of the issue because it's really a non-issue. Again, if you're aware of traditional knowledge, which is really, and we will show it now, really not much of what you have ever heard around, not even among those people who call themselves traditionalists with which are very often just some sort of disgruntled people who admittedly sort of criticize the admittedly poor state of current conservatism, not necessarily are aware of. So the video begins with, I'm just reading the script, and they show in the Jubilee episode, right? And there is this intro of the guy that starts basically saying to Peterson, you seem to have a bit of a different idea of God and belief than what the typical Christian would. And so basically Peterson immediately goes at him, legitimately saying, like, or at least, pointing out, what do you think this typical Christian thing is, or why are you even bringing that up? Like, which is a fair point as far as you see, Peterson goes beyond the logical trail of the individuals. He is a psychoanalyst. He is trained to identify what's the issue behind the words this person seems to have when bringing up a certain proposition. And basically he's saying, well, you seem to make this point because you may have some kind of issue with Christianity and you mostly have to blame it. So the guy he reveals that he's an agnostic atheist, so basically he doesn't know whether God exists or not, and he doesn't believe in God by his definition. So basically, he pointed out that most of his criticism toward Christianity and towards religion in general is the notion of the big all-knowing, almighty God that lives somehow in heaven. So this kind of characteristics. And so this is relatively irrelevant, but just for saying where these guys were coming from. Peterson at some point describes Cardinal Newman, who identified God as conscience, which is yet another way of seeing this. And again, I found even in the original video comment here, some people have got it. Like, these are just attributions to God that mean at the same time in a theological sense, because most of people who at least understand traditional thinking, or at least are the closest to understand traditional thinking, are the ones who have an actual theological education, and so are aware of what kind of nominalistic heresies people commit all the time. Basically, we live in a nominalistic heresy. People basically use their own kind of logic based on their own limits, of not just of human limits, but literally like basic ones of, I would say primary schooling, to pretend to make some sort of checkmate with words and smearing other people. This is what it's become. This is an especially widespread, prevalent attitude in especially Anglo-American liberals. The idea that the debate is not a debate, it's just trying to find a gotcha moment when you can smear the reputation of the validity, the authority especially, of your adversary, because these people are phobic towards authority. They do not accept that, in fact, tradition itself and the world, the universe, rests on authority. This is an issue I've had myself when people began to say, is Schwerpunkt an authentic source? And, there are those channels that act as if they could mechanically cite everything as a proof of, this is academically valid because we cite stuff, and maybe just lose themselves in a glass of water. Without realizing that at some point at the end of the chain, there is just a guy who thinks, has an opinion, explains that because has some experience and general thought that can expand further, doesn't stop to something that has said in a given moment or on a book, or at least that is part of a much bigger idea that, of course, they're not able to comprehend, if anything, because they literally just stick to that mechanistic copying. They don't have a memory, they don't have a work and experience themselves to back that up. So here, O'Connor, let's say, discusses just this. This is not so important. Finally, they get to the vexata quaestio, that is in classical pronunciation, if you don't know what that means in philosophical discourse, by the way. And we get to the point where Peterson asked this question. That is actually, if you watch the original Jubilee debate, is a counter question that he uses, because he is, as we've seen up to that point, that's why the intro was important. What again, the Peterson in the debater view was an atypical believer of sort, and however he still seemed to be a Christian of some sort or something along that pattern. This is not so important, and basically they made Peterson the famed question that many debaters at this point have posed him, including O'Connor. At some point, there is an interesting interview. I think the first one they had where the topic began to spiral down a little bit. There is also a previous debate between Peterson and Dawkins where O'Connor was like the mediator, like the arbiter in the debate, and they didn't seem to really understand one another. Again, I don't think I'm an overwhelmingly arrogant person, but again, I think it's really such. I can't use a term that is not insulting, however, it's so ridiculous in many ways to presume that such simple concept is not really understood. So Peterson is asked, do you believe in God? And Peterson gives this answer that has generated controversy. It says, what do you mean by believe? All right. And the other guy was prompt enough. He asked him specifically, do you believe in an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God? And Peterson says, what do you mean to believe? Right. And the guy quite quickly answers, do you think it to be true? Right. Now, this is the first, because there are fundamentally two moments in this. The debate was longer. Also, how the Jubilee format works. There are different people that debate with Peterson, and even this guy in debate, civilized debate with him, contained more. But this is the first chunk of the issue, which we can already begin to entangle quite simply. What do you mean to believe? And the guy says, do you think it to be true? So Peterson proceeds in saying that that's a circular definition, right? And he asks once again, having been asked whether he believes in that sort of more straightforward, say that more conventionally conceived idea of God, again, whether he believes in it or not, he says, what do you mean, again, to myself to believe in it, right? There is an important disclaimer to do this. The entire internet meme started to devolve essentially from the isolation of this specific phrases exchange, as if that was didascalic definition of what Peterson believes, or at least what his position, like his rhetorical or dialectical approach to it really is, by essentially smearing the guy for not actually getting to the point. Now, the reason why Peterson does not simply say, yes, do I believe in that or not, but he sort of goes after the same concept of belief, is not really meant by him to ask for himself what the definition of belief is, so much so that, as we will see now in the second part, he gives his somehow definition of belief, because he will eventually speak that out, or at least even that is somehow contingential. This is something so easy we've seen when, for example, this is completely off topic, but in our series about the von Kriege, von Clausewitz says certain things. Within the context of the von Kriege, it is a very complex theoretical system, and people use this short phrases at some point as some sort of supermarket citations that they can pick here and there, however they like, without understanding that there is a specific context and meaning to those, and that there are in fact different definitions of the same thing in the text. And so people take basically conventional human language as a matter of truth, and or like if you mean that, it's simply going to that's the absolute definition that the source would give as an absolute meaning. That, as we'll learn now, a great part of that derives from the same presumption that you somehow know better whoever you are just because you can think, all right? And this is a problem. Again, I will not start complaining right now about that, but literally we have raised entire generations to sort of to entitle themselves just because they exist, just because I have an idea, it must be valid, just because, I think this, whatever, people have to listen to me and this must be validated in a certain way. Peterson does not reason in this way, or at least he partially reasons in that way, because he's also a man of our times to a degree. But again, he's not legitimately asking for the meaning of belief for his own sake, right? His own, not its own sake. Nor for his own sake, for the sake of the question, but because he truly wants to counter the claim that many people make about him, concerning him to be Christian. The reason, and this is a very important reason here, and this is the reason that I would say not much every Christian, but any person who have a pretty solid understanding of the Catholic tradition finds as a problem, right? By knowing Catholic tradition myself, if I am asked whether I believe or not, I find it an incredibly unnecessarily contentious question that nobody should really ever ask to another person, right? And we'll see now how Peterson actually defines that, like meaning, is it just something that you say? What do you say that you're a Christian? What do you say that you're Catholic? What do you say that you're a traditionalist? Especially, why do you want to know that? And so what do you assume that belief actually mean? And we'll explain now why that is an issue in the second part, because there is a very specific connection with that. And so, is the definition, do you mean to believe to be true, circular? As Alex O'Connor says himself, is not really circular as much as, of course, like if you believe in something to be true, you have to explain what true is and what to believe is. There are two different things to a degree. And so it can be seen as circular because, again, it does overlap to, it mostly has to do with, again, the person and their, we'll see from the doctrine of the true nature's perspective what this means, given that we live in a fallen world, and so how flawed this belief can be and why, because essentially from the limit of that belief, our own fallen world depends, literally and directly, as opposed to the truth, which is, again, the divine the divine nature that is not hypostatically separated from our own, but still something that, in order for us to reach in tradition, you should have full belief. And so asking somebody whether they have a full belief, the question is, what does that mean? I mean, in Peterson's view, actually everybody believes in God to a degree, because if you attribute a unifying meaning to the universe, and he's very articulated about this, you are going to, that's the thing he understands very well from a cognitive point of view, you're going to believe in a universal standard. And in that sense, it does not matter how or do you actually believe in that for it to be the precondition of meaning and understanding, right? Or at least the truth is the precondition of that. But as far as you are concerned, in the way you align yourself with the truth, that is going to be the measure of how much you stick around that universal presupposition that is in fact valid by definition for anyone. So there is this little quarrel why they say, okay, this is a circular definition, this is not, right? And O'Connor simply goes on and he makes some general, he says every definition may be circular to some degree, but okay, we're not too interested in this whole thing. To make the long story short, in the same original video, Peterson basically concedes to his adversary, so a definition of belief, right? He describes it as something that you stake your life on it, right? And so this is a very important and you can see in the Jubilee room, all these are atheists, by the way, if I'm not wrong, because it's like, I don't know, one guy, here there is yet another meme for the video, because first they said one Christian first, versus, I don't know, 20 atheists or something like that, and then they realized that the entire point of the debate, this was the high point of, is like, Peterson notoriously saying, I'm not a Christian, or at least I can't say I'm a Christian, because if I say that, I would have to absolutize my own, say, it would be beyond my own means, all right? Fully believing that would be, or claiming to fully believe that would be an affront to the same God at that point that according to tradition, he does not know this, but I should become like if I actually fully believe in everything, right? So I don't want to spoiler the final consideration because there's much more to that, but obviously what nobody seems to literally address in this is that there is obviously a degree of belief, right? The entire meme online, the entire comments stuck to literally, like, and that reveals the mindset of people today. Do you believe in this? Like, yes or no, like a switcher, like as an electric interactor or something, like as if belief, in fact, Peterson, as we'll see now, will proceed to criticize if you say that. What do you think it is? It's something that you claim, right? What does it mean to believe? Traditionally speaking, if you think about the fides, that, it's everything, right? It's if you fully believe into something, and Peterson is writing this definition, you really live and die by that. If you truly believe that, which means that you 100% believe that without any fault, any flaw, any fear, especially, because that's the point of tradition. And at that point, traditionally, you attain divinity. And I think Peterson actually understands even the latter part, because I remember once saying, like, in a conference, like, have you ever thought, he was talking about Christ, who you can become if you can't be the best version of yourself? I mean, literally, meaning what's the absolute, like what's the infinite, right? And that does imply some of that. I don't know whether he does not literally say, again, because he does not fully believe or understand, because at some point he claims that himself, when there are important questions, he says, I don't know. He's straightforward in that circumstance, and maybe claiming that if he would become divine himself is not entirely aligned with, again, divine by which degree, right? Again, if you're not aware of the traditional explanation of afterlife, and how your soul is meant to combine, we could say, with God. It's all very difficult and contentious, and it is, just to explain in human terms. So again, also tradition, to some extent, is susceptible to opinion, as far as we may not understand, in fact, traditional text, and or the same text may emphasize one aspect rather than another. But here we don't even arrive to the single most obvious thing. I mean, the people who were debating him should be, I don't know, the special geniuses of intellectually, the intellectual pioneers of atheism, and they remain surprised to the literal answer, like, if you believe in something, of course you live and die for it. I mean, what does actual belief really mean? It's obvious. This is a 100% belief. And if you 100% believe in that, it does encompass your entire vision of the world. Like, true belief means the absolute that we are all striving for in order, for example, to understand the concept of God. And so, obviously enough, and I already explained this, if you claim to believe in God, you're essentially an hypocrite. At least if you believe that, if you claim to believe it to the fullest, you claim to understand everything, all of it, you have always the same answer, you impose yourself any question, you truly do not understand what God is. And so that's a sort of blasphemy in some ways. It's not a very common position, you've never heard of that. Again, but it's incredibly consistent with the theology and metaphysics of tradition. So they show these guys make some strange face. Oh, wow, you live or die by it? Really? And so here we enter the more, even the more contentious part of the story. You live for it and you die for it. This is what it means to believe, and he reinforces that. And so O'Connor says this is a bit dramatic and without context because you don't get what tradition is, right? If you live in a bubble where you think that the only mean to understand things is humanity, and if you literally don't understand or have never reflected on the concept of belief or fides, which is central, even in a conventional sense, to any religion, and just look at even the Christomimesis per se, like, O'Connor seems to be fairly well educated on both the Old and the New Testament, for example. And I myself think we shouldn't simply stick to that. That is part of the broader tradition, but this is not much the topic of today's discussion. But again, why do you go at what this Petersonian definition as dramatic and without context? He literally gave you the traditional definition, what it means to believe, right? Even though, again, Peterson himself may not even be fully aware of what that is, or he understands that, mostly cognitive sense, that he himself does not grasp the ultimate metaphysical meaning of, or at least he's never been vocal about. Doesn't matter. But here, literally, the entire debate that O'Connor also is involved in seems to revolve around the fact that belief is just a random verb that is simply something bound. It's mostly like something, I don't know, I see something, I see it there, and to me, yes, it is there. That means to believe, right? And here, again, not understanding the fallacy of that thought and the sort of conventional brutalization of our, limited understanding of reality and what lays also beyond it is somehow appalling from people who are supposed, again, to be philosophically and scientifically versed. So again, O'Connor claims that Peterson's position is extremely strange, and you can see from the facial expression of one of the people, I'm simply reading the transcript here, that this is an odd thing to say, but you know what, this might surprise you, I kind of actually agree with Jordan Peterson here. Yes, he says something like that, and here I'm not going to make much of the video about O'Connor's position, but let's say, given that I decided to follow his narrative as a broader sketch, let's stick briefly to that. And he says, I understand the point he's trying to make. I'm not sure, but I'll try to clarify it. Peterson always likes to point out that people often say they believe things, but when it comes to looking at their actions, they don't act in accordance with the things they say that they believe, which means they probably really believe those things. All right, so he really stops, again, to the lower definition of this. Yes, it is what Peterson basically means, and it means that also for himself. Like, this is not a preachy attitude that he has towards other people. Of course, he challenges them on that ground as well, but mostly he's really creating this controversy of not answering the simple as a question as a question. Just conventional verbal sense, whether you believe in God or not, because there is a spectrum, an intensity, if you prefer, of belief that is something that doesn't matter as much as, obviously, whether people say they believe in something or not is not too important to the broader, to the point of the broader truth, because the truth is going to remain the truth, right? Peterson is pointing the reflectors, so the lights, let's say, on the literal metaphysical implications of actually achieving to fully believe, all right? Or at least in his own way. Maybe, again, he doesn't even necessarily, I don't know whether after the debate he conceptualized that or before he had conceptualized it, but of course, as far as the debate went, it's sort of a bit of in a middle ground, and so it could cause some mild, those are the words he spoke, so he stopped to that, but nobody literally even seemed to make the effort of understanding that here we're not talking about simple, conventional talk. Here we're talking about the metaphysical implication of belief, the physical, also the metaphysical implication of belief. And O'Connor keeps banalizing the thing. So, again, Peterson barely cares about the others. He cares mostly about himself regarding that sense of belief, because he was asked whether he believes in that God or not. And O'Connor says, for example, if I said to you that I believe totally that it's not going to rain today, but then you saw me pick up an umbrella on my way out of the door, what would you think? You'd probably think that it was either just lying to you, or that maybe I thought I kind of believed it, but in my heart of hearts, I don't really. So yes, but in that sense, it's such a banal example and a banalizing example, because there is even the implication some sort of treachery, may even get to the bottom of it all, because yes, the absence of belief is in tradition associated with fear, and in this sense with deception of yourself primarily, because the divine spark to attain divinity is always sort of frustrated by this self-sabotage, basically. But here O'Connor is truly meaning it in a cognitive sense, or at least, again, in a conventional discourse, right? The point there, if we really wanted to follow his own insight, to work with that example, is a person that says that it's not going to rain and goes out, but still, while knowing that it's likely not going to rain, maybe fears that at some point may be raining, because he cannot be, in fact, fully sure that it's never going to rain anyway if he goes out, right? And maybe, I don't know, the weather broadcast was wrong after all, which is different from lying. It's literally saying, well, I believe it's not going to rain, but say I stake something on it, which evidently is not my life. We'll get back to this point now regarding also Peterson's definition, in fact. But I still will go out without an umbrella because I think that it's not going to rain. And even if there were an actual risk, there are so many different paths that it could follow that maybe can outbalance in a broader calculation the fact that I don't bring the umbrella. But again, this is completely irrelevant to the topic. So O'Connor says, so what you really believe is not just what you say you believe, or even maybe what you think you believe, but what you act out. No, this is not what Peterson is saying at all, right? This is literally a cognitive issue as well, right? Belief is what you actually believe, right? And yes, traditionally is also what you act out. But because it's reinforced by because it's mirrored by that belief. And the stronger the belief, the more you act out of that. So here O'Connor is going the wrong way, because it's basically disconnecting the two things, right? It's saying, like, you may act out something different even if you don't believe that. He does not get the traditional implication that belief, which would require an enormous video to explain exactly how it entails, but is exactly what of course, belief needs some preconditions, right? Needs some knowledge, needs some wisdom to it, whatever you want to call it, because it's just sort of different etymological, with slightly different semantic meanings, linguistically speaking. But in tradition, the more you believe, the more you act out, right? So there can't be such a thing. You act out if something you don't believe, right? Or it could even be, but it's evidently sticking just to a conventional definition, say, or this lower banalizing concept of belief, and does not take into consideration maybe the complexity of all the things you may possibly believe and how they interact with one another. So this is also yet another thing that he missed the chance of properly getting. He says, what do your actual behaviors point to? No, Peterson is not virtue signaling people who is not answering this to virtue signal people who say they believe something and then they do something else, right? He's generally explaining, just generally trying to explain the debater what belief entails at the utmost, right? Because otherwise, when can you say that you believe in something? Maybe you believe that, I don't know, less than 50%, which means that likely you're not going to act out on that, and you have an imperfect understanding of that, which may actually derive from the fact that we have, cognitively speaking and more, an actual problem in understanding what's true and what's not true, and therefore believing that and acting out on that. I haven't found expressed anywhere online. So here there's the Jubilee track. It says, believe is not something that you say, it isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative, not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. All right. Now, this Petersonian definition is also kind of interesting because traditionally speaking, it's relatively faulty, meaning that if your belief is utmost, you may not declare it in the sense that you're not going to literally speak that, right? But In this sense, you may, with this definition, you could fuel what O'Connor was presenting here, but maybe he derived the notion from Peterson's words afterward, that you may even say something or whatever, and still believing that in other ways, like for example, the presupposition of your attention and your action, which, however, may be faulty, right? It may be a good definition if, again, exploring, for example, the neurocognitive connection between belief and attention, I think is quite interesting. I think Peterson, as far as that side of the aisle, from his clinical psychological background, may be right about that. I haven't been reflecting on this, but it's not even the point. The presupposition of your action, yes, as well, but tradition is much more straightforward. This may be the problem, that I, for example, believe that in that I mostly, whenever I analyze this thing, I start from the standpoint of the actual truth as opposed to the one of the human one. But from a human standpoint, indeed, as Peterson has been describing this from a psychoanalytical point of view, belief may actually be the presupposition of your attention and your action, right? The fetus itself, here it intermingles with the concept of faith. And again, it's a relatively similar. Faith is, in its Latin etymologies, the proper term. Belief is some more adulterated English term that, at least especially, it's such a conventionally banalized term, which may be the problem actually as a cultural product of how we understand belief, that maybe the entire problem of this debate renders a bit less, right? But indeed, faith, right, being able to step in the abyss, really believing that there is a bridge in the midst of that you actually create in the moment, because through your own divine eye, your providence, which literally means the capacity of foreseeing the future, because you have a full belief of that even creates that in a metaphysical sense. That's definitely a traditional belief, and it's shared again by all great ancient cultures. There is nobody that says something different regarding this. So again, nobody is talking about that. So O'Connor talks again, says, but why does Peterson say that you stake your life on it? So he comes back to that point. If you believe something, you stake your life on it. And so, again, he repeats the thing, what do you mean by that? You live for it and you die for it, from the debate. And O'Connor says, like as a point of definition, almost, what does he think that to believe something you have to be willing to die for it? That question prompts this extraordinary exchange from the Jubilee debate, and we will see now this is fully the second part of it all. Because the guy in the debate says, so to Peterson, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it? And Peterson says, not really. And this is, again, an obvious statement, right? If you truly believe, you fully believe something, because let's be honest, guys, science does not, and we should trust science as a mean when it's tested, when it's properly methodologically handled, etc. But again, so I say this because I'm not here to smear science, meaning say, oh, this is the religious guy who's against science. I'm literally saying that our limit of knowledge, because science is descriptive of it, literally does not know what conscience is, what life is, what belief is. Like we have zero idea what it is. All right, we can partly describe how we, in fact, this can neurocognitively work, how we act out relatively to it, whatever. Yes, but what is that triggers this, or how it works at a deeper level, how this entangles with reality, and especially, again, how, if we are speaking tradition, what tradition says about that is not here. It's exactly what Peterson says, and it's not gotten here by any of the other interlocutors, right? So the debater says, okay, so then how would you define... this is Peterson says, so then how you define belief? Something you say? Which is exactly the point we were saying before. Like, it's not just about, I believe this, and then, I don't do anything about that, right? It's not, as we were saying before, not just acting out on that, because here belief is intended in a sense of full belief, at least by Peterson's definition of living or dying for it, meaning that, because we'll talk now about the chair, the pen, because they exactly brought the debate on that too. What does it neurocognitively mean in a strictly scientific way for us to say, here I have my carafe of water, for example? Do I believe it's there? What does it mean to believe that? Because again, we have a pretty conventional human understanding what it means that at least this is real to an extent, or that we believe that it's there or whatever. But what is our actual definition of belief? What does that mean? And what does it mean to exist? This is a carafe, and it's here and whatever. This is a deeper problem that the concept of faith / belief, if you want, deeply entails. Right, faith has acquiring conventional meaning, a sort of deeper, more profound meaning than belief. So again, but given that here belief is literally referred to the highest one in God, you can argue that it's basically the same word here in the question that that Peterson was posed to. So the debater says, okay, I'll explain to you. Because, again, Peterson said, so then how would you define belief? Something you say. And the guy says that the obvious example, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists. But if someone, threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? I think you would do that too. This is what he says to Peterson. You wouldn't lie to save your life. And Peterson has this dramatic moment of his, because he's a bit of an actor sometimes, but in this case, it was very effective. It was generally effective at that. It says, don't be so sure. Literally, the question was, here's a pen. Somebody has a gun pointed. This is the same thing that O'Connor reflects on. Has a gun pointed at the head of one of your friends. It says, if you say this pen, you believe this pen doesn't exist, your friend lives, otherwise I'll shoot him. And say at that point, would you lie for saving your friend's life? And everybody here says, yes, even your own life. And Peterson is, in this sense, I understand why it may sound astonishing to a person that has not followed up to this point of the video what we're talking about. Says, yeah, for this pen, for my belief in the existence of this pen, I wouldn't lie regarding that. Now, this does entail a paradox or at least some further explanation, because Peterson in here has been carried out a little bit by emotion, or at least is making a point that is slightly more shaded than it seems. Why? Because it's not like he would literally die rather than saying that this pen, that he believes this pen exists. Why? Because he's been just told, right? Here, the people went crazy and began to mock him, but he literally told you the minute before. If you ask Peterson whether that pen exists, he would literally ask again, what do you mean by it to believe? Do you mean that this pen is true? What does it mean that a pen is true? In tradition, in the doctrine of the two natures, we believe that only the divine dimension is true, and that the fallen world, including the pen, and including Peterson, and including anybody here, is not fully existing. I'm not kidding. This is literally traditional doctrine. In as much as this fallen world is just some sort of degradation of mirroring, blurring image of the divine perfection. So if you literally ask Peterson whether he believed that pain exists or not, he probably would start with the gun pointed at the head of himself or the friend, would say, what do you mean by exist? If he would literally give you the same answer, he wouldn't say, okay, that pen exists, and his brains are blown out, right? That's not what the point actually became. I understand that straightforwardly, you pick. In fact, the thumbnail of the video that I used is laughing at this specific section without without any, I think it's a video last 20 seconds where Peterson says basically that he would get his family shot, or at least it's as if that sounded like that, in order not to say that pen does not exist. That this is not what he said, right? However, it is true that in this sense he conflated, or at least he brought his assertiveness, his emotional assertiveness, to contrast the guy's point, not by claiming that the pen exists or buying into the example that the debater prompted, rather referring to the full, say the 100% level of belief. Meaning, if I believed that pen fully exists, which is not going to be the case, traditionally wise, or not even for Peterson, whether he understands this or not, he would not lie about it, right? So it's as if Peterson was here defending emotionally and saying, it's my business to think what I believe or not, and if I can make it to believe. And that's why he's so, again, assertive on that, because it's a bit of what it means to be a man in tradition, except it is referred to a bit to the wrong example that here sort of came to trigger him in ways that, in fact, also in the debate, nobody seems to have really understood. In fact, this part is this statement of Peterson is mocked in as much as it seems like he's fully assertive about that. Not that he has been caught in a defensive, it's my business, blip you, right, just for asking the question, right? But this is actually what's going on with him, all right? And the guy continues, the debater says, you wouldn't lie to save your life? And so here Peterson deflects and says, how much do you know about, a bit, but also with an important answer, says, how much do you know about me? This is a valid answer, telling the truth. It says, I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice. So you understand how personal this has become to him? And yet, this sounds well. This is a better answer, or at least it drives the point home to some extent. And so the guy looks at him all worried and says, would you lie to save your children, your mom, your dad? And Peterson says yet another very important thing. I don't think lying would save them, right? So here is paradoxically buying to the example, but at least the example here, the guy has not explicitated the pen. Like he's simply like asking, like, wouldn't you lie to save your family, basically? This elicited some reaction. Think about all, Holocaust movies that show, people hiding and lying just to get away with, of course, the perquisitions, the hiding, etc. And so that makes you think, because also traditionally speaking, this is maybe a complex thing to explain, but not also such a difficult one to understand. You may find yourself in such a miserable condition that you would be prompted to lie for some reason. And again, we will analyze that, because in a fallen world, various people's sins, including the one of lying, could still be conducive to, it's always paid for, like lies in tradition are always paid for. And the point, however, again, that in a fallen world, if everybody kind of lies, everybody's mortal, everybody's imperfect, there is paradoxically a way out also through other people's sins, paradoxically, right, in different ways. What Peterson is actually stating here is that if we lived in a world in which everybody spoke the truth, think about what Xenophon says in the Cyropaedia about, the noblemen, the Persian noblemen that were told to always tell the truth, speak the truth. There is a very specific reason. The Holy Ghost, Victoria, the Imperium, would fly away with its golden wings from the, especially leaders, but everyone really, just for a single lie, right? Just think about what it traditionally means. The world would be perfect. We would live in golden age, the age of gods. We would have not fallen to disregard. And so by speaking just the truth, or thinking the truth and simply enacting it in the same moment for how intense the belief actually is, would be enough to save everything and everyone, right? So, which is also actually what the meaning of the gospel really is. And you know that Christ's statements are very often equally controversial to some extent, because they are actually referring to two different dimensions that people constantly conflate because they think that Christ is not talking about the higher nature and therefore is injuncting people to simply abandon the world, not by transfiguring it, but by sort of criticizing it and driving away from it, which is also agnostic heresy that, of course, Christ did not entail, but again, made hundreds of videos on this, and I'm not going to repeat myself in there. So here O'Connor picks the video once again. It says, okay, pose. So the idea is that in order to believe something like the idea that this chair exists, you have to be willing to die for it. And this guy says, well, yeah, I believe that this chair exists, but if my life depended on it, I would happily just lie about it and say that I don't believe that. But I think that one thing people are missing from this exchange, this is O'Connor saying, is that in order to lie about something, you have to believe it. If somebody threatened my friend with a gun and said, Alex, you have to say that this chair does not exist if I shoot your friend, and yeah, I'll probably lie and say, yeah, okay, the chair does not exist, but that doesn't mean I don't believe that the chair exists. I still believe it exists. I would just be willing to lie about it. So if my life depended on me saying that the chair didn't exist, I would happily say that. But suppose my life depended on me believing that the chair didn't exist. Could I do it? For example, suppose I'm some kind of airplane and I want to sit down on a chair. If that chair exists, then I'll sit down on the chair. But if the chair doesn't actually exist, I'll fall through the ground and I'll end up dying. In that circumstance, regardless of what I say, regardless whether I'm willing to lie about it, whether or not I actually sit on the chair will have to depend on my actual belief. Does the chair exist or not? Like if I'm in that airplane and say, I believe the chair exists, but I don't actually believe it, I'm not going to sit down in that chair. If I don't believe it's really there and might kill me to sit down, I'm not going to sit down. So truly believe something means that if you lie for some reason, your life actually depended on that belief. Yes, this is, I continue to read, this is actually a fair logical point. Traditionally speaking, and that's where Peterson is misunderstood, you can't, all right? If you don't speak the truth, if you are able essentially to bend the truth to what other people impose on you, you're basically giving away power, and so you're not acting upon the truth, right? So O'Connor's example is something else regarding his own, he himself sitting on a chair that may exist or not exist, and so it's just a belief between him and himself. That's a different point. That's lack of knowledge, right? That you truly, like, it's a human nosological limit. You don't know whether the chair exists or not. It's not much a matter of belief, right? It's not just it. I mean, tradition, as I said before, actually states that if you really wanted that chair to exist, it would exist. Again, I know it sounds in a conventional discourse as if it did not make sense, but truly the idea that the eye of Ra, the divine providence, literally molds the world in its own image to literally create a chair in that sense for you to sit and not to die, is something that is traditionally attributed to divinity, and obviously cannot be attributed to humanity as long as it remains mortal, faulty, and whatever. So again, you will not know that the chair is there, but because you're just a human and you're not even making the effort of presuming, of, as Peterson says, like of understanding the preconditions of. He doesn't even actually say that. He talks about of attention and of your action, but especially regarding the latter. The notion, again, that belief is, by being absolutized, can literally lead to that creation, is there. It's at least pretty straightforwardly present in the attribution of divinity, of sacred rulers, etc. So it is connected with the making of that. It's as if power, metaphysical power, also existed in the moment in which you would create yourself that chair on that plane, as opposed to having just to roll the dice, playing the Russian roulette, and sitting in a hole in a plane and just falling down, right? So the question, and again, how this takes shape or form, and it's beyond human understanding as long as we are human, which I fear is the only precondition understood by people when they look at the world, right? Exactly because they historically rejected tradition by saying this power does not actually exist, because at the end of the day, we're still dying and suffering, and it doesn't seem to work. And that's a fair point if you really want to bring it to its own extreme. As long as people do not actually achieve what, say, I don't know, conventionally in Christianity, Christ achieved, right? I will not talk about the doctrine of transfiguration. I will talk about other things, but again, tradition does tell us that such power is there in potential. So this is just what O'Connors was saying. So your life actually depended on that belief. You would action according with that belief. In other words, you'd be staking your life not on saying that you believe in it, but on actually believing. So, by the way, the previous part of the example regarding that I already hinted at, that is to say, lying on something just to get away with it, just like the guy pointing a gun at you and putting you in front of that decision assumes the fact that you have lost power, imperative, and divine grace in the moment in which that guy was in the position of pointing a gun at you. I know this is also very sort of at least contentious proposition, given the fact that we believe that it's other people's faults, that again, the concept of fault is very deep. Basically, in tradition, you are as faulty as the person who you become a victim of, because already thinking of yourself like a victim is a sin by excusing all the precautions you could create in order to control the world that is technically attainable, but by not being the best person or the best version of yourself, you do not have there. So most people do not understand that, because it also ties so much with consent. Like, I don't know, if a woman gets raped, whose fault is that? Traditionally, in the doctrine of two natures, there is no such a thing like it's just the perpetrator's fault, right? It's both at the same time. All right, they do not exclude one another, because at that point, how much do you care about yourself? This is not, say, we took the most heinous example, but like if you cross the street and you get run over by a car in any circumstance, say, whose fault is that? Right? It's going to be both. Like in conventional legal, so human matters, of course, the fault is going to be if you cross on the right path, like the guy who ran over you, right? And we try to fix that. But this does not mean that we shouldn't actually train people to understand that still, if things go wrong, they have an actual indirect fault for not having been able to be there and to get that. So what Peterson is saying by saying, it's not lying that will save them in that sense, is actually true. I mean, it could save it, but because there are some other dynamics connected with that will be conducive to that, not because that action of lying will have actually saved them, right? And on the contrary, you are already in that position, in that condition, in a position of inferiority, and somebody did something paradoxically right for having the upper hand on you. And this is something that Peterson, I think, I don't know whether he ever discussed, but it is also, again, a very straightforwardly traditional concept. So O'Connor says, so they can't talk about existence of a pain. This guy says, I believe the pain exists. So it's the same example, but if my life depended on it, I would just lie. Okay, but would you stop believing that the pain existed? Even if you lied about it, would you actually stop believing that the pain is there just because somebody was threatening your life? So this is also the mistake that is commonly done. Like, what does it mean to believe? Literally, I'm making the same Petersonian claim there, because what does it mean to believe? In absolute terms, right? Because if it turns out that the existence of the pain is also the precondition of the entire world, in a sense, and of the entire existence itself, I may have some issues with that. I mean, there have been wars fought over biblical passages, right? I will accept this or not. Why? Because that matters to a degree that is definitional to the world order and to the standards, to human standards, including the possibility to act out on that belief. That's the reason why, for example, by law, nobody can impose to you to coerce you in that way, to impose you such sadistic game, like if you don't say this, also a stupid game at that point, if you don't say this, I will kill you. All right, because it's also something that in positive terms does not really lead anywhere. And if I just don't want to say what you want to say, if I don't want to bend to you, hell, why should I do that? Yes, there could be different things at stake, but again, it's not, as Peterson rightly points out, it's not by lying that what is at stake came to be at stake in that particular situation. Right, and if people had actually believed more in their standards, they would be stronger and in a position where they would not be threatened at gunpoint. This is what they're completely ignoring in the debate, which is connected with the doctrine of the Holy Ghost / Imperium in the imperial Catholic tradition. So you understand what O'Connor is saying is even if you lie, you are actually believing that the pain is there, all right, which is also straightforwardly conventionally correct, meaning it's not like they say, no, that I don't think that the pain or whatever that means to believe that the pain is there isn't there, right? I just truly don't know what it means for a pen to be there. What is a pen just per se? I mean, these are pretty straightforward issues debated since ever, in philosophy. So they are actually important concepts because they lay under the precondition of existence to begin with, and so they seem paradoxically relatively important things to live and die for. Right, until, of course, we don't find ourselves in our imperfection in such dire circumstances, but still, imagine that the guy who is pointing the gun at you regarding you lying to the existence of that pen was literally like a political movement that would start taking over the world in a totalitarian fashion because a crazy guy wants to impose the entire world with a pen. That people have to lie in order to save their lives regarding that pain. That would be something worth actually fighting and dying for, right? So it's not such a ridiculous statement. I understand that it was mocked and ridiculized online, especially when Peterson's haters, have the possibility of running wild in the comments or whatever. But this is actually even in non-traditional terms, pretty straightforward answer you can give to that. So O'Connor says, and he basically remains, I think, on this basis, says that's not something you could do even if your life depended on it. You can't just change your belief like that. So that the question is not when your life depends on it, would you lie? The question is when your life depends on it, which belief do you actually act out? And whichever one you act out in that circumstance is probably the one that you really believe. Again, not really in the sense that if you really believe, as you just said, that the pain is there, you're lying. Like, yeah, in most circumstances it would be, but not in the extreme ones, again, that we were talking about. So he says, I think it's that kind of what Peterson is getting out there. But because O'Connor thinks that there is, again, it's just some sort of virtue signaling from Peterson's side, which is partially true in as much as he has to motivate the reason why he can't simply say, I'm a Christian, I'm not a Christian, yes or no, that way. It banalizes the whole thing. It doesn't get to the point. And actually in Peterson's thought, it is correct, right? I mean, and not just in his thought. I mean, in his thought as the extent of his thought that we also know through his work in general. And so it shouldn't even be that difficult to understand. So to be clear, I didn't know Connor says it could be off the mark here in terms of what Peterson actually meant to say. Yeah, you may. I suppose I'm just trying to still mend Peterson here by putting the statement into what I think is probably its most plausible form. And I've actually thought about this exact thing before. In fact, we kind of had the same discussion when I spoke to him on the podcast when people are looking at essentially the definition. Just seconds ago, you said, well, what is it to believe? And you said, well, what you believe is what you're willing to die for. I'm not willing to die for my belief that this chair exists. And again, it actually is, because the question is, what do you mean, first of all, to believe, but also what do you mean by chair in the sense of what do you mean to exist? This became a meme because you can't question everything, but indeed, if you start analyzing, and this is not just like Peterson, like philosophy did that, right? Philosophy at some point, especially in the 20th century, surrendered to an extent in, being, because it culminated into science, especially in analytical philosophy, also Wittgenstein, etc. They got to the point which they failed to reach to a definitive conclusion regarding obvious, issues like existence. And it's interesting because, again, we somehow conventionally put our stakes on that, but we don't seem to exactly know what this really is. So it's not such a strange thing to begin with. And if your existence in a chair, if you're existing in a chair, I am also currently existing on a chair, if anything. But what does it mean to exist? But I mean, if your belief in the existence of a chair was really a matter of, let's say, you are a deep thinker, an epistemologist, and you really believe deeply that you have gotten to some conclusive moral and scientific conceptions regarding why it's important to believe that something does exist actually, and that it's important, and that, it's on this basis that everything can happen in the world, whatever. As silly as it may, or extreme as it may sound, it's not that you would necessarily, in fact, be able to fully believe that yourself. That's the point the tradition says. You can't 100% believe in that, probably also because the chair may not actually fully exist as you could think that it is. And so any conventional definition of this seems to banalize and to reduce the deeper issues of higher meaning, in fact, of truth, where everything, if you remember from the beginning, started, regarding, in fact, the existence of a higher, of the truth itself, and so something that is fully true. And so here, rather than the conversation, rather than revolving around the truth, it started revolving around whether a person is able to believe and what it means by believe, rather than pointing out that there are some issues in even acknowledging whether we can think of knowing or of believing or whatever, and how do we cope with that, as a matter of fact. So this is actually a very important aspect. So Connor says, I'm not willing to die for my belief that this chair exists, maybe in a broad sense, if not believing that chair existed required me to sort of give up my trust in my sense data. And yeah, so this is what we're talking about, and die by accident by sort of walking off a cliff. But again, he's banalizing that in a sort of utilitarian sense. He does not understand, in fact, that there is a hyper-real concept where that may be at the root of any kind of presupposition or any kind of belief, for that matter, which is exactly what Peterson is basically saying, like that full belief. And because, again, it all started from the truth. It all started from God, right? Within the same debate. And so you can't just banalize the thing, just get down to a chair if you asked before if God exists. There is a reason why the concept of God came about in general in the history of mankind, which is very different compared to the concept of a chair. And so I don't think that the whole example is quite fitting, and in fact I think it sort of banalizes the whole discussion, and it doesn't really help driving the point home from especially who's criticizing Peterson here. Cliff, because I don't trust my eyes anymore. So I actually had exact initial responses. This guy in the Jubilee video said, well, I believe the chair exists, but if I'm not willing to die for that belief, and then I immediately realized, wait, hold on, yeah, I kind of am actually, like, I'm not willing to always tell the truth about belief, even if it means my life is at risk. But when it comes to how I actually act my life independent of the existence of this chair, I just do believe that it exists. So saying the first point is important because, again, the full belief does not revolve around the chair. It revolves around the truth, which is a higher principle that is also commonly understood as overlapping with God. So again, it depends on the belief, the type of belief, the intensity of the belief, and what that belief actually entails just per se. And it could be actually entailing, from everything you could arrive to presume, again, that the existence of something, denying the existence of something is the denial of the presupposition of a higher order and the truth that created that. So even if, according to the doctrine of the two natures, we live in a fallen world, this chair, this pen, whatever, would not exist if it wasn't the reflection of something higher. So you cannot actually or simply lie by that, and or at least considering that also humanity is fallen, right? And that, in a sense, according to tradition, the same incarnation, the same soul, and so everything that pertains to this lower world is the reflection of human morality, of sub-morality in this dimension. It becomes difficult and potentially also further hampering to simply deny even the existence of common objects that are not supposed to metaphysically be absolutely existing beings, simply because of our same human limits makes us still believe that, I don't know, this pen actually exists and this chair actually exists. So when O'Connor says, I could even lie by stating that this chair does not exist, it's as if, I don't know, there is a 60%, let's assume, banal reality about the existence of truth about the existence, which are two different things, but still, of this pen. But that is somehow associated still with my own and also the world's collective moral condition that also mutually interfere with each other, right? For example, I don't know whether that was mockery or whatever, but O'Connor's came up recently with a video saying like that everything could be scient, everything could have an actual soul, and this is something that is described in the metaphysical tradition, the metaphysical theory of space, the metaphysical understanding of space, but that's also a bit more complicated. In any case, he could be getting there if he pushes a little bit further, but he seems like in this pivotal topic, because Peterson is such, a gold mine for YouTubers like those, to be so to the lower interpretation of it, and so the most straightforwardly conventional and boring, and in fact anti-traditional or atraditional, obliviously atraditional. And so O'Connor's not O'Connor's in any case. And so I would act as if it does not exist. But so in that sense, what I truly believe is something that at least in some circumstances I would be willing to die for, if you lie all the time where anybody asks you about your beliefs. To lie about beliefs still requires that you actually go, okay, this is it, all right? But it's kind of actually obvious what Peterson is doing there. And the entire memes came out regarding, this guy says something stupid, he would die for things he believes in, haha, whatever. Peterson is obviously talking about the higher belief, given that the entire debate took place around God, divinity, the existence of the same God, and whatever. And so, again, that's not what other people intend or seem to take Peterson seriously for. And again, so basically all the reactions have been ridiculous. There have been so many videos online that says, there was one that cracked me, like, there was, I don't remember, was this guy that says, I don't know, watching a Jordan Peterson's video in 2017 and 2025 and 2017, this guy that, he's actually, he's against postmodernism, and he convinced me once to clean up my room, and in 2025 sounds, oh my god, this guy's mentally ill. Was he saying there's Peterson in the imitation that says like, am I okay? First of all, we should define what it means to be okay, and something like that. And so, and that's not what Peterson is. The problem, I would say, I could go on for hours regarding the reception Peterson at different levels, meaning that I actually followed for years the Daily Wire, right? Peterson has been working with those guys, and I mostly always followed Ben Shapiro because I think he's the most sensible of all of them, and I don't think, again, they all make the best job, and I think that Peterson himself misses tradition entirely. Normally because he sticks just to Judeo-Christian tradition, and he does so because he somehow, again, I don't know whether he's truly limited. I know he studied Taoism to a degree that may have helped him, but I think he completely lacks the conventional knowledge of tradition, comparing the European religions and so on. Normally people who would make this claim are people who are actually discrediting Christianity or saying that, I don't know, it's Semitically inferior, whatever. This is not the point. The point is you can understand the same Bible only if you understand it through the broader arc of tradition, and at so many different levels. And Peterson, I think, is not aware of this, and or he wouldn't be able to simply go out there and say, okay, now we will teach Indo-Europeistic history. Also, Indo-Europeistic religion. Also, here I may be professionally biased, but I don't think that there is anywhere in the conservative discourse abroad any actual historian. Right, most historians are some sort of fraud, and they still, there are so many conservatives, I don't know, they still think, I don't know, the Enlightenment saved civilization, or this kind of stuff, right, seriously. And don't even get me started on that topic, because, again, if you don't study history, if you don't study politics, if you don't study war, you can't fully understand tradition, religion. And that's also the path that I actually followed, rather than coming from religion and getting to warfare, seeing meaning there in the way we expounded. Like, I'm sure that Peterson would find von Clausewitz incredibly revealing, as much as, again, the traditional doctrine of struggle and victory, the entire metaphysics of the Holy Ghost. He doesn't seem to have ventured there very much, and actually one of the reasons why Anglo-American conservatives behave like that is that they fall into the Gnostic heresy of presuming that there is some sort of earthly power separated from the divine one. Peterson is a proponent of that. Like, he's obsessed with the concept of tyranny, and he refuses to understand that might is right, which is actually what in tradition is the case, but not in the way he understands. Because he misunderstands fundamentally the fault of the people, which is something that I think for marketing reason the Anglo-American conservatives did not discuss. Like, if your government sucks, I don't know how to tell you, but you suck as a people, right? It's the completely direct reflection, and we still have lesser people sort of, alienating from reality, believing that there's some sort of virtues, Puritans with the terrible Satan at the top, and that they don't even realize how weak, stupid, undereducated, ugly, incapable, unaccomplished, and all what morally derives from that, which is a complete disgrace. I've never heard, and this is, again, a marketing reason, evidently, I don't know anyone in that environment to actually speak for it. Like, for example, speak about it, if anything. Ben Shapiro, again, I admire the guy in many ways, and he's actually very harsh regarding personal responsibility, but he doesn't go around saying, like, there is a massive crisis because the people suck, right? The entire narrative is the government sucks and the people are okay. If you leave them alone, they will do fine. No, right? Government traditionally exists exactly because people suck at governing themselves because of their own fault. Once they didn't, now they do. And there is a pretty straightforwardly, also metaphysical prediction about this regarding the constant degeneration of the world. And I've never heard, I don't know, Peterson or anybody else talking about this in pretty straightforward ways. And I think it's simply they couldn't say it, they couldn't voice it, they couldn't essentially make the point of it all, because it would feel like, I don't know, spitting on saying people that should be able to follow you. But again, if you don't grow them a backbone, let's say, what kind of results do you pretend to obtain? This is a huge issue. Like, if you think about it, you fix that and you fix everything. So again, it's not to say that government, again, let's not even talk about this topic per se, but it's evident that so many things go wrong because people are faulty. It's not just the fault of one guy at the top. Would it give that power, him that power? Even if you don't believe in the Holy Ghost, in the Imperium, in a God-given power, Gnostics, again, that are historically communists, feminists, antinatalists, vegans, etc., and I made a video about the Cathars just recently, as you know, that describes this, are the ones who separate an earthly power from a divine power in all history. And again, if Peterson just knew this from history of religions, if he had actually done anything else but reading the Bible and actually seeing how that applies to reality, and not just reading some books on totalitarianism or psychoanalysis from the 19th or 20th century, he would know that. He doesn't. That's his limit, and unfortunately, again, we have to suffer that. I don't know whether I'm the only person who actually gets to this. Again, I know that there is some kind of traditional revival at some levels of society, but it seems to me that very often some sort of provocation and not an actual explanation of why things happen the way they do, or why they should happen, or how they should happen. This seems to me an incredibly important topic that nobody seems to properly address. And I think it's the moment in history where these things are to be discussed. Again, I don't know how many people are going to watch this. I don't know how I'm going to market this, but normally my videos do not get more than, 1,000, 2,000 views a day. And so it's quite unlikely for anyone to be able to follow this. Probably outside of my circle, just out of the fact that YouTube will not sponsor that. But it's also my fault, traditionally speaking, for not pushing this further. I needed to talk about this because I think that these are relevant topics. They can be expandable, and I'm not kidding. I'm actually planning to contact Peterson regarding certain things that again he admitted not to know about. Well, tradition is pretty straightforward on, right? And again, tradition is not my own opinion on how to read the Bible. As you understood it, it's something else also from the series about Imperial Catholic tradition. And by continuing with this, I think we can go pretty far, pretty quickly. So I am fairly satisfied overall with the picture. And I'm confident that this is what we're able to eventually achieve.